Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story: The Lake in the Woods. This is a story about my sisters, Juniper and Marigold. June and Mary, twins born on the first day of September, 2.5 years older than me. We lived in rural Wisconsin. Our father was a long-haul trucker and our mother waited tables at the Denny's. Mary, June, and I were great explorers, charting the woods behind our modest home with construction paper and dulled crayons. We spent most of our time playing outside, sun, rain, or snow. There was safety in numbers. We were always back in time for dinner. In retrospect, I'm not even certain our mother knew just how far from home we strayed. This is a story about a lake we found, a couple of miles into the wilderness. It was a Saturday in early February. We were bundled up in puffy jackets and snow pants. When we first came across the clearing, it was striking. The most beautiful thing my young eyes had ever seen. Crisp white snow, sprawling flat as far as the eye could see. There wasn't so much as a twig or a paw print to interrupt the pristine blanket of powder. It was Mary who realized there was water beneath. She pointed out the reed stalks that speckled the perimeter, even approached what must have been the edge, crouched down and brushed away the snow to reveal ice. She was always very science-minded. Even with her mere 12 years of experience on the planet, she was one of the smartest people I knew. So, of course, she was the first to ask why we'd never seen this lake before. In all our years of wandering, we must have come this way at least a dozen times. I had no answers. I simply shrugged and pulled my hat down tighter around my ears to stave off the cold. June was silent, staring out into the vast expanse of white. Other people had trouble telling my sisters apart, but I never did. They had the same wavy chestnut hair, gray eyes, and angular jaws. They had the bones of birds, thin and fragile. But June was softer, quieter. She had more freckles sprinkled across her cheeks. Mary questioned and June listened. That was the way it had always been. "Do you hear that?" She almost whispered, gaze glued to the horizon. "What?" I asked, somehow feeling I should be just as quiet. "The crying. Someone is crying." "Junie, what are you talking about?" Mary straightened up, dusting the snow off her gloves. June raised a finger to her lips, requesting silence. I didn't hear anything. No birds. No rustling trees. I'm not sure I've ever experienced a deeper or more unsettling quiet. If there's one skill Mary never quite developed, it was keeping her mouth shut. It only added to the gravity of the situation when her eyes widened in sudden comprehension and a full minute passed before she said anything. "Where is it coming from?" She wheeled around, staring at the frozen lake, just like June was. June took a few steps closer to the edge of the lake. There was an odd look in her eye, one I've never seen before or since. She looked empty, like an upright shell with nothing inside it. Her face was devoid of any expression. Mary, on the other hand, was growing more agitated by the moment. "We have to look for help," she blubbered. "There was a hunting cabin a little ways back, wasn't there? The Darby boys have a hut out here. We'll go get them." June didn't give any indication of agreement or dissent. Mary grabbed my shoulder and squeezed it. "Ryan, you and June stay put. Stay right here, and I'll be back." I nodded, confused, more than a little afraid. I still didn't hear anything. I accepted it all, because the prospect of both my sisters going insane at the same time seemed less plausible than my just not being able to pick up on what they were hearing. Mary bounded off, leaving boot prints in the snow. I watched her run until she disappeared between the trees. When I turned around, June was already a few feet out onto the lake. I called to her, asking what she was doing. No response. I yelled that it could be dangerous and that she should turn around. She ignored me. I started crying. At first, they were crocodile tears. The kind a little brother can usually muster when he's trying to get pity or attention from his older sisters. But it turned all too real when the resounding crack echoed through the air. June sunk below the ice instantly. My cowardice is probably the thing that saved me. I was paralyzed, shocked and terrified. There was a gaping hole where my sister had been. No matter how much I wanted to move, to run to her, to save her, I couldn't do it. I just stood there as the seconds ticked by into minutes, and she was surely dead. Time is a funny thing to pin down. I couldn't honestly tell you how long it was before Mary showed up, with two of the Darby boys in tow, and I tearfully choked out what had happened. The Darby boys looked at me in utter bewilderment. Mary frowned with concern. June is right over there. Mary pointed. I turned to look. There was no hole in the ice. June was standing a ways off, next to the edge of the pond, still staring at some undefined point in the distance. Apparently, whatever sound Mary heard had stopped. The Darby boys rolled their eyes and grumbled about what wild imaginations my sisters had. But they walked us back towards a more clearly marked trail and said we shouldn't wander off so far. June didn't say a word the whole walk home. The hairs on the back of my neck kept prickling, like someone was staring at me. But any time I glanced over, June was looking straight ahead. Maybe I imagined it, but I could have sworn there were droplets of water clinging to her eyelashes. This is a story about how my sister started to change. I was still a little young to understand the finer points of puberty, but June's came early. We were sitting on the couch together when she bled through her soft, pink sweatpants. She didn't stand up right away. In fact, she probably noticed long before I did. Guess I'm a woman now. Fucking fantastic. She started shaving her legs and wearing tighter clothes. She'd put on makeup in the girls' bathroom at school. She used to have lunch with Mary and I, but with the change in appearance, people started to notice her. It wasn't long before she sat at the same table as the girls who had money. The girls who lived in big houses and carried around real leather purses and drank pilfered strawberry vodka when they had sleepovers. It wasn't long before June started talking to boys and twirling locks of hair around her index finger as she giggled at jokes that weren't funny. June used to come into my room late at night and sit on the edge of the bed. Sometimes she talked to me. Sometimes she would just stare. Either way, it seemed threatening in a manner that was hard to place. I would pretend to be asleep if it was late enough, but we both knew I wasn't. Sometimes I would cry. "You watch me die, Ryan," she would say in that soft, eerie, calm voice. "You didn't even try to save me. I'm sorry." Pressing my face into the pillow didn't hide the tears, but I didn't know what else to do. "You don't love me." "I do, June. I'm sorry. I was scared." "You have no idea what it's like to drown. All that stuff about it being peaceful is bullshit. It hurts, Ryan. It feels like barbed wire wrapping around your lungs. It's like being trapped in a tiny box that keeps getting smaller and smaller until you're completely crushed." She would lean down to whisper right in my ear. Her hand on the back of my neck, squeezing just a little too hard, was icy as the first snow. During the day, she'd carry around those little chemical hand warmers that skiers put in their gloves. But she wanted me to feel the cold, because it was my fault. "Say you love me, Ryan." I love you, June." "Good boy." Frank Darby went missing. I was probably the last person to see him alive. Or well, the second to last. I saw him climbing out of June's bedroom window a little after sunset, while I was raking leaves. It wasn't a secret what they'd been doing. I'd gone outside because I could hear the slick sounds and creaking mattress springs through the thin walls. June climbed out after him, smiling much too wide. Her hair was messy, and her face was flushed. The two of them got into the branches of the tall maple tree that grew beside our house and shimmied down it. They walked towards the woods, holding hands. Just as they were about to disappear into the trees, June looked over her shoulder and winked at me. The park rangers found Frank about a week later. I didn't see the body, only heard stories. It's hard to say what was embellished and warped in the game of telephone that spread through town. But the most common details are that Frank's throat was ripped out and his ribs had been cracked open. Whatever killed him took his heart. My mother fell ill. Stage 3 breast cancer. I was 12. June and Mary had recently turned 15. Mary cried a lot. June spent most of her time at the hospital, stroking Mom's hair and feeding her soup. Sometimes I wonder if her hands were cold. I wonder what my mother thought about that in the fading twilight. Mom died in the middle of the night in early spring. June was the only one in the room with her. Joe Darby met a similar fate to his older brother for a slightly different reason. Joe asked Mary to the homecoming dance. At that point, Mary was wearing glasses. We didn't have much money, so her dress was from the thrift store, several decades out of fashion. She and Joe swayed back and forth at arm's length, smiling awkwardly. Or that's how I imagine it happened. I wasn't there. I was there for the shouting match in our backyard. When June called Mary a cunt and they pulled each other's hair and fingernails broke skin as they tumbled on the ground together. Joe went missing shortly after that. Mary spent a lot of time searching the woods for him. After June apologized, they went together. They disappeared into the trees, holding hands, and a pile of bricks settled at the pit of my stomach. Mary came back with damp hair and stopped wearing her glasses. A few days later, the police found the shredded remains of Joe Darby. Once again, missing his heart. This is a story about a lake in the middle of the woods and how my sisters tried to drown me in it. It was a foggy winter morning. My sisters kept throwing each other meaningful looks across the breakfast table, communicating in that way twins will. Having a conversation I could never hope to understand. I was 14 and afraid of them both. When they asked if I wanted to go on a hike, I said no. They didn't insist. They didn't have to. Mary had made breakfast. The sleeping pills were already in my system. When the drowsiness hit, I tried to make myself throw up, but it was too late. They put me on a sled and dragged me out into the forest. I was unconscious for most of it, just little flashes of trees and sky. They waited for me to wake up. They were standing over me, completely naked, smiling wider than a human mouth should be able to stretch. They didn't seem uncomfortable, despite the frigid wind whipping through their hair and the snow between their bare toes. "Can you hear it yet, Ryan?" June laughed. "I'm sure you will soon. You'll join them, all of them, at the bottom of the lake, screaming for help, begging for mercy. It's a little pathetic, really. I wanted to believe I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. In a dream, my sisters would have shifted into something monstrous. Their hands would have become talons. Their teeth would have morphed into fangs around a forked tongue, but they looked the same as they ever had, identical except for the freckles. They each grabbed one of my arms and lifted me to my feet with a surprising strength. They stepped in tandem, slowly towards the edge of the lake in a grim procession. I was the star of it all. My survival instincts must have kicked in about halfway to the ice. I began to struggle and scream, sure that nobody was listening. What is there to do when faced with imminent death but shriek at the heavens for mercy? As I screamed, there was a swelling chorus of tortured cries. It sounded as if the ground hand opened up beneath me to unleash the anguish of the damned. The deafening noise echoed all around us, centering on the lake that was no longer frozen over, but frothing and steaming like the surface of a cauldron. My sisters held my shoulders firmly and lowered me into the water. Feet first. It was blistering, painful beyond the point where I could distinguish heat or cold. It burned. That was all I knew. Perhaps it's poetic that a Darby saved me. Perhaps it was divine intervention. I tend to think it was nothing but dumb luck. It's hard for me to believe in God anymore. Or at least, I can't believe in a God that is fair and merciful. The only thing I know for sure is that evil exists. Something dark and twisted claimed both of my sisters and will never give them back. But a gunshot rang through the air, just when the water was lapping at my knees. June released her grip on me suddenly. My center of gravity shifted backwards. It was enough time for me to wrench out of Mary's grasp and crawl back up the snowy bank of the lake. I couldn't stand, but I kept pulling myself along, farther and farther away from the water. 2 more shots in rapid succession cracked through the air above me. I saw the 80-year-old grandmother Helen Darby, with a floral handkerchief tied around her head, holding a double-barrel shotgun, aiming it at the lake. I didn't turn around until long after she rushed past me. June's naked body lay prone on the lake shore, bullet wound in her back leaking blood into the ground, steam floating into the air from her torn flesh. Mary was nowhere to be seen. I didn't hear any more gunshots. Helen Darby circled around after a while. She put me back on the sled and dragged me to the hunting hut, where the rangers came to get me. I lost 3 of my toes to frostbite. I considered myself lucky. After my sisters disappeared, Helen Darby effectively adopted me. Whenever my father wasn't home, she'd make a point to stop by. She'd teach me how to cook, help me figure out how to run the washing machine, knit while I did my homework or watched TV. Most importantly, she'd sit in the living room with the shotgun, long into the night, making sure whatever had gotten a taste of me didn't come back for another bite. When I was old enough, or rather on my 15th birthday, Helen gave me a gun of my own and taught me how to use it. Part of me knew it was all a little bizarre, but I could pretend it was about the grandson she'd lost. She was just treating me as their replacement. We only talked about what happened at the lake once, and never again after that. It was a cold night in December. We were sitting by the fireplace, listening to a radio broadcast of A Christmas Carol. Helen had been drinking gin straight from the bottle for a couple of hours. She often got sad when she drank. Her baggy, wrinkled eyes shone with a hint of tears, and the corners of her mouth sagged downwards. "There's something wrong out in the woods," she said suddenly, unspoken context looming over us. "It takes the little girls and kills the men. It's been there longer than this town. Folks just stopped believing in it." I had so many questions but couldn't voice any of them. I just stared at her wide eyes. It still talks to me. Always talks to me. It tried to make me kill my brother, my husband, my sons, but I'm too old for it now. It can't do much besides talk. I've tried avoiding it, but look what that did. No, somebody has to stay out there. She took another long swig from her bottle. "You know, I'm not going to live forever, Ryan." I nodded, solemn. Life already a tangled mess of grief. What better cause could I pursue than wardenship? You know what has to be done when I'm gone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a sigh of relief. This is a story about how I moved into a small cabin in the middle of the woods. I hunt and fish and sell lumber to whoever needs it. I don't hear the voices or the screams, but some moonlit nights there's a rapping on my window. I see the silhouette of a shriveled, naked woman with matted chestnut hair. One day she will probably finish what she started. Until then, I will keep watch and do my best to pass along the story. The worst things happen when we try to forget the warnings of a different time. Don't wander in the woods. Don't stray off the path. Something evil might get you, just like it got to me. Second story. I found a phone in the woods, and this is what was on it. Alright, first off, this isn't my story. I found a phone out in the woods near my house. They have been bulldozing and taking down trees to build new houses, and I like to walk around and see what they've done. I do not know the woman that posted this, or what her Reddit handle was, but I know that she wanted it up here because she believed we were the only people that would believe her. Her phone was pretty banged up and has absolutely no service. I figured this was the least I could do for her. From here on, these are the words of a Mrs. Helena White. October 9th, 2013. My name is Helena White. I am 36-year-old female from Kentucky, which is where I currently am. I need someone to see this, though by the time you do, I will already be dead. I don't have internet access here, just my cell phone that's dying and has 100% no service. I have scheduled this to upload to Reddit, where people actually believe the weird things we all have to say to each other, if anyone ever finds it. Everyone there has an open mind and can at least know the truth. I have also scheduled one to go to the police station, but they will never find me. The best they can do is give my family the news. I feel terrible for my mother, that she will never know what happened, never have a body to bury, never have closure. No one I know will, but at least they will know that I am gone. It's better this way, believe me. If they knew the truth, they would never sleep again, and no doubt they would hunt for me. Again, though, they will never find me. I will be dead, just not gone. I know you all on Reddit have heard some seriously crazy shit. I mean, I read about the girl that found that weird creature/house thing in the woods right here in Kentucky a couple of months ago. And I've seen people talk about everything from zombies and ghouls to ghosts and vampires. If there is anywhere that will listen and know my story is true, it is here with you guys. I should explain. My husband Jeff and I headed out into the wilderness. I probably shouldn't say exactly where, because I really don't want this to happen to someone else. It's better to let it stay here with Jeff and me. But it is a very beautiful and remote patch of forest that extends for many miles. It is a very large place and does see visitors ever so often, but the seclusion of it is one thing Jeff and I both love. We had been planning this trip for months and were seriously excited that it was finally time to go. We had everything you can imagine for camping for a full 2 weeks out here in the beautiful wilderness. Rainproof tent, dishes, cookware, food, water. We were ready for roasting marshmallows and hot dogs over the open fire, hiking and admiring the beauty all around us. Yes, I am aware that this makes me seem like a hippie, and maybe I am a little bit, but I really love the outdoors, especially the woods. Anyway, Jeff and I had planned this right down to every last detail and were ready for the perfect, tranquil, and rejuvenating camping trip. That isn't what we got, though. 2 days in, we got caught in a huge thunderstorm and had to hunker down inside our tent while the wind and rain beat so loudly against the sides and top of our little rainproof tent that we thought we might be blown away. Just as quickly as it came, it was over and the sun started shining again. If you've ever lived in or visited Kentucky for any amount of time, you know what I mean when I say that this was seriously just typical Kentucky weather. It's kind of our thing, I guess. 1 minute blaring storm, next, sunshine and birds singing. After that nice little downpour, every bit of our gathered firewood was soaked, and they weren't drying up anytime soon. Jeff went to find more wood, and I decided to stay behind and clean out the fire pit, so it would actually burn the wood Jeff brought back. It was starting to get dark, and if we didn't have a fire, we would be cold and unprotected. I had gotten it suitably ready when Jeff came flying out of the ever-darkening woods. He did not have any firewood. I was a little upset by this since it was already nearly completely dark. Jeff, what the is all I was able to get out before Jeff was at me throwing one arm around me and one over my mouth. I was terrified at this point. What was this? Why was he doing this to me? But I could hear him mumbling, "Oh fuck, oh fuck, 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 fuck. Please pardon my language, but he was mumbling that over and over in my ear. I knew what that meant too. It was bad and about to get worse. I heard my husband's voice in my ear again. Helly, his nickname for me. When I say run, I want you to run as fast as you can back to the car and get the hell out of here. Okay. I was terrified at this point. What the hell had he seen? And was it coming for him? I moved his hand off my mouth and stated, I'm not just going to run off and leave you, Jeff, and you know that. I have seen my husband scared only once in the 15 years I've known him. It was right after his father had a heart attack and they didn't think he was going to make it. Jeff and his brother Dean paced the floor back and forth. Once I went to stop Jeff, to try to comfort him, but when I caught his eye, my heart broke. I grabbed him and held on as tightly as I could until his silent sobbing finally subsided. The look I saw when I caught his eye this time was so much worse than the last one. He was terrified of losing his father, but this was like he had reached a new level of fear. Before I could ask him anything else, we heard this god-awful roar. I mean, this thing could have shaken houses. It was the most terrifying and unexplainable sound I have ever heard. Jeff grabbed me, kissed my forehead, and told me to run. I didn't obey. I probably should have, considering how things turned out, but it's done. Not 2 seconds later, this monstrosity of a creature comes barreling into our camp and within view. I am a little embarrassed to say that I screamed like a little girl. I think most people would have. This thing is so hard to describe, but I am going to try my best. This thing was at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Either way, he was big. What really threw me off, though, wasn't how high he stood over me. It was how skinny he was. I can't describe to you how skinny he was. It was like he had never eaten in his life, like skin simply draped over bones. His bones rippled through his gangly leathered skin. It looked like giant worms wriggling as he moved. His arms were almost as long as he was tall. They could stretch much farther than a typical man could. And he sort of looked like he just rose from the hell of the earth. He had a large head that looked like that of a deer, only a psychotic evil deer from Satan. His nose elongated and dripped with white, foamy drool. Just like a deer, he had long, knotty horns that branched from the tip of his skull. That leathery-looking skin was grayed and patchy with what appeared to have been hair at one time, with his hands and feet sprouting out what looked like weeds. Like a big pile of hay had been stuffed up his sleeves. If he had had any, I might have been more relieved. The creature stood, watching for a moment, taking us in as we did him. I was terrified. I had never seen anything like that before. The scariest thing I have ever encountered in the woods was a wolf, but luckily it was alone and didn't appear to be hungry, so he just turned and jaunted off. This thing was quite the opposite. He looked hungry and determined. I started to scream uncontrollably. Apparently it didn't like that. He let out a roar at us, blowing that foul-smelling drool all over us. That sounded like everything you can think of dying and screaming in their death all at once. He then extended one of his giant arms and smacked me with it and grabbing Jeff before I could even get back up. I heard a rumbling sound as he pulled my husband closer to him. I realized with horror that rumbling was of hunger. Jeff was gone in an instant. The creature snapped his head off like a doll and swallowed in one quick gulp. He began just biting into Jeff's body like he was some kind of sandwich or something. The crunching was the worst. Trust me, it is a horrid sound no one ever needs to hear. I threw up, screamed, and then remembered that Jeff had told me to run. I was too late, though, because just as I was pulling myself, painfully I might add, out of the brush pile I had landed in, the monster was done with Jeff. Just like that, the man I knew for 15 years, the man I called my husband for 14 years, was just gone. But then he came back. The monster taunted me by becoming reflective. As he moved, a facade of Jeff took his place. I could see my husband, like he had become him, but I could see through it too to the monster behind the disguise as well. Perhaps it was because I saw the monster before he changed. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, that thing can take the form of people it has killed and eaten, or at least, that's my best guess. I finally freed myself from the brush and took off, full speed ahead toward the direction of the car, my husband's melodic voice filling my mind, my ears, my very core, beckoning me back. He was so convincing that I almost turned back. I fell into a huge hole. I think it was a trap. I just don't know if it was a trap from people for that monster, or a trap built by the monster to catch people. Either way, I fell at least 20 feet, and my leg is broken in 3 places. I can't even move it. I'm going nowhere. I'm sitting here writing this now because I can still hear my husband's voice calling for me, and sometimes the monster's roar. He is looking for me, but he thankfully went the wrong way. I know what's going to happen though. He'll be back shortly, and he will kill me, and then he will steal my face. So, please, if you ever find this, anyone, get out of these woods now. And don't come looking for me. I am dead. We both are, and some horrible monster is wearing our faces so he can eat you too. Mom, I love you so much. Don't come looking for me. Goodbye. Helena White. Me again. I can tell you this. I'm not going back out into those woods. Quick update. Apparently you should not Google the name of the woman above, Helena White, as she appears to be a porn star. When I Google my name, I get sent to a boob page. It kinda sucks. Anyway, for those of you wondering, let me try to explain it a little better. I live about a mile from where they have been logging. They are building a new road, one that is supposed to make it easier on us all to get around. Basically, they are bypassing our town. But the important part is that before they started the logging, I spent a lot of time back into those woods. I like the solitude and atmosphere. At least, I did. I don't know how I got lucky enough to find that phone, but it was in a huge pile of dirt, barely sticking out of the side. They are ripping the place apart back there. I suppose it does have to be level for a roof though, right? I brought the phone home. Of course it was dead. I was able to charge it with an older universal charger my dad has. It was a fairly nice phone, and I thought I might be able to clean it up and give it to my little brother if I could get it working. I did. I went through it and I came across this message in a notepad app. I have absolutely no idea who this woman is, nor did I know that there is a porn star with the same name. LOL. Sorry about that. As for the monster she keeps talking about, I don't have a single clue. I have never seen or heard about anything like that around here. Our campfire stories and old legends are pretty much the Goat Man and Bigfoot, so your guess is as good as mine. I thought of a Wendigo and a Skinwalker, but there have never been any stories of anything like that around here that I know of. Third story. The Church in the Woods. My name is Mark, and I'm a detective. Not like on the force or anything, a private eye, like in the movies. It's kind of the family business. My grandfather was one, and my dad and I grew up in that world, and it was only natural that I go into it too. It's not as exciting a job as you would think if you go by Hollywood. It's mostly sitting in your car for 10 hours at a time, waiting to take pictures of cheating spouses to show the spouse who is paying you to prove that they're being cheated on. It's kind of a bummer sometimes. People get married, they get cheated on, they get divorced. So often, kids are caught up in the middle of it all. Now and then something crazy comes your way though, or something exciting. I want to tell you guys about one of the crazy ones. The craziest. It happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still can't convince myself it was real. I'm not religious, and I don't believe in the supernatural. At least, I didn't until Benson Street. Now, I'm not so sure. A woman got a hold of me in August of 2020. She had lost contact with her sister. She came into my office and spun a pretty crazy story. Her sister lived in a small town in Michigan called Franklin's Green. My client was named Shelley. She was 62 and her sister was a little younger. They were close and spoke almost every day. But for the last month, her sister hadn't answered her calls. And then Shelley did a little digging and came across a couple of news stories that were a little hard to believe. They said that everyone who lived on Benson Street had gone missing. There were 8 houses on the dead-end street, and every person who lived in them had seemingly vanished into thin air. I mean, I read the stories myself. After Shelley left, I did my digging, and she was right. It was crazy, and I was a little surprised the story hadn't gotten more attention. I called Shelley back that night and told her I would take her case. I didn't usually travel that far for a job, but the next morning I packed a few things up and left my office in Cincinnati. Hours later, I arrived in Franklin's Green. There was a little crappy motel, and I checked in and then headed right for Benson Street. It was smack dab in the middle of a little sleepy neighborhood, lower middle class, mostly ranch-style homes. The entrance to Benson Street was completely roped off with yellow police tape stretched between a telephone pole and a stop sign. I parked nearby and decided to canvass the surrounding streets. I knocked on doors, stopped, and chatted with an old man out watering his garden, and stuff like that. No one had much for me. Everyone on Benson Street had simply been there one day and gone the next. No one knew why. The people I spoke with were happy to share their theories with me. The street was full of drug addicts who had all gotten high and wandered off. There was a gas leak that killed everyone in their sleep, and the gas company removed the bodies to avoid suspicion. Nothing I was told seemed very likely. By the time I had spoken with a number of people, the sun had gone down. I debated going back to the motel and starting the next morning, but I thought I would at least check out Shelley's sister's house. I grabbed my flashlight from my duffel bag in my trunk and ducked under the yellow tape. Shelley's sister was named Mary, and she had been married to a guy named Tom for nearly 40 years. They had 2 children who were grown and lived out of state. Shelley had told me they were worried about their mother and father as well and hadn't been able to reach them. Nor had Mary and Tom reached out to them. Mary's house was third on the left, and I did a slow circle around it, shining my flashlight in the dark. I'm not sure what clues I was looking for, but there were none to find. One thing that took me by surprise a bit was just how big the houses on Benson Street were compared to the rest of the neighborhood. I made my way back around to the front of the house and went up onto the porch. I tried the doorknob and was surprised to find the house unlocked. I was sure the cops had been through all of the houses on the street, but as I stepped inside, I saw no evidence of this. I worked through the ground floor slowly, resisting the urge to turn lights on as I went. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, and one of these houses with lights burning in every window would be very noticeable to anyone who drove by Benson Street. The home was eerie. It really was as if Mary and her husband had simply vanished. There was a half-empty can of Coke on the kitchen island, and dishes that needed to be washed in the sink. A cloud of flies buzzed here and there, eating the food residue that had been waiting to be cleaned away. A door in the kitchen opened up to a set of stairs leading down. I decided to save the basement for last and went upstairs instead. I worked slowly, just as I had on the ground floor. There were 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom was the married couple, obviously, and another of the bedrooms was a guest room. The 3rd bedroom had been converted into a home office. The laptop on the desk there was dead. I found the charger and plugged it and then went into the 4th bedroom, which had a treadmill and an exercise bike. I had saved the master bedroom for last and worked my way through the dresser there, finding nothing but clothes. The closet was another story. There was a shoebox up on the shelf, hidden underneath folded bed sheets and a hand-stitched quilt. I pulled the box down and opened it, surprised to find a knife. The knife was ornate, the blade curved, and the hilt made of bone and wrapped in leather. Etchings had been carved into the bone, and I unwrapped the leather to better see. I can only describe the etchings as strange runes. Almost like an alphabet, they were very letter-like, but damned if I knew what they meant. I took pictures of the knife and then replaced it in the box and hid it once again. All that was left was the basement, and I was surprised to realize I had been putting it off, even dreading going down there. I had no other choice, though, and headed down into the kitchen with heavy steps, and then down once more. I swept my light across the open basement. It was unfinished, the walls cement, as well as the floor. Small frosted windows set near the beams of the floor above. The basement had just been used for storage. I found cardboard boxes filled with Christmas decorations and a small wooden chest filled with important papers like birth certificates and old pay stubs. Above me, a creak. I froze and turned off my light. A thud, another creak. Someone was walking on the ground floor. I wrestled with what to do, and I could feel my heart thumping wildly in my chest. Did I call out? Admit that I was trespassing? Did I go upstairs and try to sneak out? Did I stay and hope they didn't come down? I crept slowly to the foot of the wooden stairs that I had come down. I had left the basement door open and cursed myself for my stupidity. I listened to the footsteps above me. Sweat stung my eyes, and I wiped it away. The footsteps came into the kitchen, and I moved away from the bottom of the stairs. I looked for a place to hide and wedged myself in behind a stack of plastic totes along the wall just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. I held my breath. I peeked out, but it was so dark down here I couldn't see much more than a dark shape. It paused at the foot of the stairs, and then turned and went back up. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. I didn't hear any movement upstairs. I left my hiding spot and went to the foot of the stairs. I took them slowly, exited into the kitchen, and then shut the door as quietly as I could. I paused there for a long time, listening. If anyone else was still in the house, they weren't moving. I hurried to the front door and pulled it open. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I rushed off of the porch and into the middle of the street. I turned and looked at the house and felt sheer terror as my eyes swept up to one of the windows that looked out into the street from the master bedroom. Someone was standing there, staring right at me. The same dark shadow I had seen in the basement. I turned and ran down the street to my car. I rushed to the motel and went inside my room. The locked door wasn't enough. I pushed the heavy circular table that served as an eating area in the small room in front of the door too, and found myself exhausted. I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of a dark shape and of that curved blade. When I woke the next morning, I thought about going to the local police and telling them who I was and who had hired me, but in my experience, most cops don't take kindly to private detectives, and I was afraid they'd keep me from Benson Street. So I showered, dressed, and headed back over. I felt a little more comfortable in the daytime. I went back into Mary's house and looked for evidence of someone else having been there the night before, but found none. Then I went back outside and started at the end of the street and tried the front doors as I moved around the cul-de-sac and went up the other side. A lot of doors were locked, but 2 were unlocked. The houses I could enter were a lot like the ones I had been in the night before. It seemed as if whoever had lived there had just vanished, or up and left without taking anything. In the first house, I found a full set of luggage, and it didn't seem like the overstuffed closet and drawers full of clothes had been touched. No one had packed for a trip. In the other house, I found something rather alarming. It sat right out on a bedside table in the master bedroom, a knife exactly like the one I had found in Mary's home, hidden away. The same bone handle, the same runes carved into it. The same curving blade, sharp as can be. I went back to the middle unlocked house and began to search. It took me a couple of hours, but then I found it, stashed away in a floor vent. An identical knife. I left quickly and went in my car. I found a little diner and stopped for lunch, and sat at the table with my phone, searching online for any sort of information I could find on the knives. I searched for news about cults in the area and came up with nothing. I had taken pictures of the knives and tried to find anything about the runes, but ran into a dead end there as well. After lunch, I went back to Benson Street and stood on the sidewalk. I was fairly sure that if I broke into the locked homes, I would find knives there as well. I walked slowly past the houses and paused at the end of the street. Past the end of the road were woods, mostly evergreens. A dirty little path cut from the end of the street and through the lawns of the two homes in front of me into the trees. I started down the path. It was well-worn and continued well into the woods, curving around trees and overgrown plants. I walked along it for nearly half an hour before I saw it. The church was old and made of wood, squat and slanted. A spire went up over the front double doors, a strange symbol that resembled an inverted cross made of what looked like iron nailed to the front. I went to the building and tried the doors. They opened freely. Surely the police hadn't missed this strange building. Inside were a few rows of pews and an altar at the back of the large open room. A large leather-bound book with yellowing pages that curled at the corners sat open on the altar next to a silver cup stained red inside. I couldn't read the book. It was written in the same strange runes that were etched on the handles of the knives. I took pictures of a few pages and hurried back outside. Standing in the church, I had felt a growing sense of unease, almost like I was being watched. I thought of the shadowy figure that had been watching me from the window of Mary's home and shivered. I went back to Benson Street and rushed to my car. I drove to the safety of my motel and went in and locked the door, barring it once more with the table. I called Shelley and told her about the church. She had never heard her sister or brother-in-law speak of it. I hung up with her, and it struck me for the first time that the sisters were named Mary Shelley. One of their parents had a literary sense of humor. I called Mary and Tom's two children next, one after the other, and asked about their parents' religious stances. They told me their parents were Catholic, but not practicing. Church hadn't been a thing in their lives as kids. I sat on the end of the bed and scrolled through the internet, trying to find the strange inverted cross sigil I had seen on the front of the church. It took hours, but eventually, I found it. I clicked on the picture, and it took me to an amateur website that seemed to be all about various demons and hellspawn. It was the symbol of something called the Nameless One, and it was said he would bring his followers great wealth and power in exchange for sacrifices. I thought immediately of how the homes on Benson Street were much bigger than those nearby. I set my phone aside and shivered. The whole thing was freaking me out. I do not scare easily, but that job I had taken was proving to be a strange one, and I couldn't get over the feeling that I was messing with something I shouldn't. When the sun went down, I drove to the local bar, a place called Mel's. It was busy, and I took a stool at the bar and had a beer. Over the course of a few hours, I spoke to a few townspeople about Benson Street. I was truthful with who I was and what I was doing. A lot of people clammed up when I brought up the street. I didn't ask about the church or the symbol I had seen, but I did ask about the houses and how they seemed to be so much more expensive. One old guy gave me something. Everyone on that street was a weirdo, he told me, and we all know it. Wherever they are, it isn't good. Another patron of the bar brought up how people in the area had been going missing regularly for the last few years. Drifters and homeless folk, no one important, no one who got the police involved very much. Back at my motel, I called Mary and Tom's oldest. I asked if they had grown up in the house on Benson Street, and he told me no. His parents had bought it a few years ago after Tom had retired a few years early. I thanked him and hung up. I was asleep when a thump at my door woke me. I went to the peephole and peered out, but could see no one. Fear gripped my heart with its icy hand. I went to the window and carefully pulled the blind back at the edge and looked out into the parking lot. A line of 4 people stood there, right in the middle of the black pavement, staring right at my room. It was dark and I couldn't quite make out who they were. Man or woman, I couldn't tell. I had no idea of their age. They wore dark clothing, robes of some sort, with the hoods pulled up. As I watched, they turned as a group and walked out of the lot and across the street. I watched them until they faded into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went back to Benson Street. I was drawn to it, or more specifically, to the church in the woods. I hurried down the path and entered that strange building again. Someone else had been there. The book and cup that had been on the altar were gone. I did a more thorough search of the building and found a small trapdoor just behind the altar. I lifted the hatch open and shone my flashlight into the hole. A rickety wooden ladder led down 10 or so feet to a dirt floor. I took a deep breath and started to climb down. There was a tunnel, curving away to the right when I got off the ladder and turned around. I kept my light on and crept forward. It twisted this way and that until it opened up into a large chamber, and I found the people who had lived on Benson Street. They all lay dead on the dirty floor, nude with their arms crossed over their chests. I needed to tell the police. I turned and came face to face with a man in a hooded robe. "Intruder!" He screamed at me, and I pushed past him and ran. I knew he was chasing me. I could hear his heavy footsteps right behind me. A chill blew through the tunnel as I ran. Voices burst forth from nowhere, speaking a language I couldn't understand. I got to the ladder and began to climb. I got to the top and rolled out of the hole and turned and used my foot to slam the door shut. There was no way to latch it. I stood and turned, shocked to find 100 or more candles had been placed throughout the church, all burning. So 2 or more robed figures. One came at me as the trap door behind me burst open and my original pursuer came through. I tussled with the new robed figure. He wrapped his arms around me, but I shoved him off, into the altar. The candles there shook and then fell. A musty carpet that led from the altar to the front door lit immediately. Soon the room was alive with flame. The robed figures howled, and I was forgotten as they attempted to put the fire out. I ran for the door and burst through it and into the woods. It was still morning. The sun hung low in the sky, the light getting cut off by the many trees. I turned and looked at the church. It was burning. No one came out after me. I turned and ran for Benson Street. I didn't stop running until I made it to my car. I drove to the motel and checked out and packed up my things. I didn't call the police until I was an hour away from the town. I told them what I had found and hung up before they could start asking me questions. Then I called Shelley and told her everything I had found. The knives, the church, the robed figures. I could tell she didn't believe me, and she started to cry and curse me out for not giving her something real. I understood, though. I hardly believed the words coming out of my own mouth. In the end, I didn't speak with Shelley again. I didn't go after her for the unpaid balance she owed me. A week or so later, at home, I searched the internet for any sort of news story about the church behind Benson Street, but only found one little article that had been written in the local paper about a fire in the woods there. It didn't mention the church. In the 3 years since then, I've seen robed figures a handful of times. Sometimes I don't trust my own eyes and wonder if I'm hallucinating. I don't think I am. I think the followers of the Nameless One are keeping an eye on me. They never approach me. They never threaten me. But they're there, right? They're watching? 4th story. Forest encounter left me scared. Okay, this is something I experienced a few years back. During the summer break, My sister and I were visiting our aunt who lived in the country. Her house is located in a fairly wooded area, but there are several neighbors around. There's a man-made lake about a mile away from my aunt's place, and it is pretty much surrounded by woods. Me and my sister loved to walk around near the lake whenever we visited our aunt, ever since we were small kids, so this time too, we decided to go for a walk. It was about 5 p.m., and the sun was shining brightly. We were told not to walk alone near the lake, because there could be wild animals or poachers and whatnot, but we decided that we were old enough to go alone, 15 and 13 years old. So we sneaked out while the adults were chatting in the living room and strolled along the path to the lake. The air is fresh, the sun is bright, and we're feeling like we could take over the world. We were walking along the wooded path to the lake when my phone rang. It was my mom, who was at the aunt's. Because we sneaked out without telling them, and we were almost at the lake, I didn't answer it and put the phone into silent mode. Stupid. Yeah, I know. Then we reach the lake, take our shoes and socks off, and dip our feet into the cool water. We talked for some time. Regular teen stuff. I was telling a joke to my sister when this horrible feeling washed over me. It was like I was being watched. I instantly whipped my head around because I thought there was a perv or someone stalking us, but there was no one around. My sister, too, seemed to be spooked by something. She asked me, "Did you feel that?" And I said yes. We sat there for a few minutes, holding each other's hands and hearts in our throats. But nothing happened. The feeling eventually went away, so we brushed it off. After some time, we got bored and decided to search for something to eat. The woods around the lake were practically full of wild berries, so we decided to go pick some. I found a nice patch of berries not far from the tree line, and we quickly started picking them up and shoved them into our mouths. I had finished half of the berries I had picked when I noticed a really cool bug on a leaf. I wanted to snap a photo of it because I hadn't seen it anywhere else. I searched my pockets for the phone and it wasn't there. My sister asked what was wrong, and soon we both started crawling around searching for the phone. It was a fairly new one and quite expensive, so I absolutely did not want to lose it. "Don't freak out, sis," my sister, said. "Let's just give it a ring. If it's nearby, we'd hear it." She took her phone out and called my number. Instantly, my ringing tone starts going off, to the left of us. It was near the path we took into the forest, and was pretty loud. So I take a step to go and retrieve it, but grabs me by the wrist and stops me. "You turned the silent mode on, didn't you?" she asks with a shaking voice. That's when it dawns upon me. I was 100% sure I turned it on. If the phone is silent, then what the fuck is making the ringing tone? Then we realize that the entire forest is silent other than my ringing tone. Dead fucking silent. M's grip on my wrist tightens. We look at each other, with sheer terror in our eyes. Suddenly, the ringing stops. Silence. We waited for another 10 seconds. That's when we heard it. My aunt called out to us from somewhere deep in the woods. "M.T. I'm here." We froze. It sounded like our aunt, but my gut told me that it wasn't. Something was off about it, like the usual emotions were absent. It was almost mechanical, like someone mimicking something he had heard before. Then the voice called out again. This time, it was definitely wrong. It was closer to an animal trying to speak. I screamed at him, "Run!" So we ran. Ran like all hell was loose and fucking demons were driving us out of the woods. During the time we ran, I could hear something following us, hot on our heels. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, and occasional screeching noises. Almost like a wild cat, but far more sinister. It reeked of evil. We ran past the lake as fast as we could and finally reached the paved road where several vehicles were parked. The woods also ended there. We were out of breath and scared to the core. I turned around to look. there was nothing. Several people gave us concerned looks, but no one asked anything. We walked with a group of folks who were heading in the direction we needed to go. We kept looking around, but the usual sounds were there, like birds singing. When we got home, we were immediately grounded. We were not allowed to go for walks for the rest of the time we stayed there, even with an adult. We didn't protest. Sometime later, I described this encounter to my aunt. She looked at me, her face as white as a sheet of paper, but she didn't say anything. I tried to press her for information, but every time she shook her head and refused to talk about it. Later, I heard their town had a lot of disappearances after our experience, especially kids and homeless people. I don't know if these things are related, but something tells me they are. Both my sister and I get shivers when we talk about it, considering how close we were to getting abducted or even killed. I now know about crawlers/rakes, and I believe that's what we met. Fifth story. The well in the woods. When I was a kid, Dad told me to never go into the woods near our house. Of course, I always asked why, but Dad didn't seem to want to talk about it. And he always stopped every one of my siblings from going in there too. I'm the oldest of 7 siblings, from oldest to youngest. There's me, Diego, and then there's Silvana, Sebastian, Carlos, Inez, Romina, and Alejandro. And all of us are forbidden from going in the woods. All of them always protest, especially Inez. She's really been getting into a bunch of witchcraft stuff recently and wants to go in the woods to do who knows what. But I found out firsthand when I was 16 why Dad didn't want us in the woods. People went into the woods all the time and came out okay. I used to live in Blackthorn, Ohio, and the woods in my childhood house are near the border of town. I was walking by the woods when, more curious than ever, I decided to go in and see what Dad was making such a huge fuss about. I walked around, going deeper in, and found nothing. I laughed at Dad and was about to head straight back out when I found an old well in a clearing. I don't know what compelled me to look into it, but I did. And all I saw on the bottom was a bunch of dirty, slimy water and other gunk. I leaned a little too far over, though, and I fell in. I screamed all the way down before landing with a sick splash. Luckily, I survived the fall, landing on my butt. I sat at the bottom of the well and screamed, when something I couldn't explain, at least not then, happened. The slime and gunk began to move, eventually shaping itself into an almost humanoid shape. It towered over me. I tried to scream again, but nothing came out. There was a small plastic purple figurine of a superhero in the well with us. The slime creature reached out and grabbed it, passing it to me. I held it, still scared and unsure of what this creature wanted to do to me. But nothing happened for a while. Eventually, I started absent-mindedly playing with the toy, and that's when the creature took it from me, whooshing it around its head, pretending the toy was flying. I gulped. I was starting to suspect the impossible, that this creature just wanted to play with me. And so, I indulged the slimy monster. For about a week, we mainly played with the superhero figurine and sometimes assorted clapping games. We tried playing tag once, but there wasn't any room in the well. And eventually, the police found me in the well and got me out. I told them I had fallen in the well and been unable to get out until they rescued me. For whatever reason, I didn't tell them about the creature. Mom and Dad were mad at me for ages, but especially Dad. And I bring it up now because of my recent re-encounter with the creature. I came back home for a visit recently, and to visit some of my other siblings. Carlos, Inez, Romina, and Alejandro still live at my childhood home. And especially Alejandro will live there for a while. He's just a baby, after all. And for a third reason, to revisit the woods, to see that creature again. And when nobody was looking, I walked off into the woods and found the well again. I looked into it, looking for the creature, and this time, The slime and muck rose out of the well to see me, pulling me forward in a hug. It still had the superhero figurine. It was really tight though. I tried to struggle out of its grasp and failed. I worried it was going to just kidnap me in the well forever. I regretted every decision that had led to this point. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, turning around to see Dad. I started panicking, but he spoke first. Theo? I was confused. Theo? The creature had a name? And how did Dad know it? Just then, Dad pulled a matching superhero figurine out of his pocket and showed it to the creature. The creature took it and started making the two superheroes fly together. And then Dad explained everything to me. When he was 4, he and his best friend Theo had gone to play in the woods with their favorite superhero toys, pretending they were flying. But Theo hadn't seen the well, and he had fallen down and broken his neck. And now apparently he had been resurrected as this slimy creature and was still mentally 4. These days, we've come to an arrangement with him. Either me or Dad comes and plays with him for a while, at least twice every week. And of course, not actually in the well, but still in the woods. It's a bit strange babysitting a giant slime monster with the brain of an average 4-year-old. But it's growing on me. No pun intended. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.